Afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this afternoon for this afternoon's webinar, which is all about how we can overcome and flourish following difficult times. And I'll be sharing with you some ideas about mindful working and how that can hopefully support you and your teams going forward. Before I move into today's session, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Lorraine Checklin, and my company is called Flourish Health and Wellbeing. And actually, my background was spent within a variety of HR roles for over 20 years, where more and more I found that I was supporting mental health in the workplace. And it became a real passion of mine in terms of how I could support others, how I could equip them with a toolkit to help themselves, which is why I initially trained as a mindfulness teacher about 4 years ago now. And I started to deliver programs both where I was working and also in the local area, and did some additional qualifications in areas such as stress management and health and wellbeing coaching, and decided I loved it that much that I wanted to set up my own business. Hence, Flourish Health and Wellbeing was formed. And in that time, I've also trained as a mental health first aid instructor as well. So for the purposes of the next half an hour and our session, I'll be drawing upon those different areas of experience, different aspects of training, things I've observed in the workplace, and hopefully giving you some ideas about how you can help and support you and your well-being, and how you can support the teams as well. So the aims then of this afternoon's session, firstly, I think it's important to reflect upon everything that's come before now. So starting to think about some of the challenges and also the impact that the past 15 months will have had upon us all. I'd also like us to consider the implications of the pressure performance curve. So what implications had that pressure had for us all, and also the teams that we support, and what important considerations do we need to make on the basis of that? I'd also like us to think about some of the positives. So exploring what you've learned, the things you've accomplished during this time, and how this can support you going forward. I'll also be sharing some mindful ways of working and some mindful approaches to support you, not just in your working lives, but in your home lives as well. And together as a group, we will also participate in a mindful calming exercise. So that's the plan for the next half an hour. There will also be the opportunity for some questions at the end. And Stephen's kindly offered to support me with a poll, which we'll be doing partway through the session. So what I would say to you all is, obviously in the roles that you're undertaking day to day, I'm sure your focus is often on other people and how you support and equip others with the skills and the knowledge that they need. But when I work with individuals, I really would encourage them to think about themselves first and foremost. One of my favourite phrases is, you can't pour from an empty cup. So it's very important to consider and commit to your own well-being during the course of this session as well. Obviously, I'll be drawing upon different areas of training, different things that I teach. But in terms of mental health, obviously, it's not meant to be seen as a substitute for medical advice. So if you or any of your teams are struggling with mental well-being at the moment, I'd always encourage you to visit a GP. And also, when we participate in the calming exercise together, it's worth noting that although mindfulness is considered to be a very safe practice, there are some health cautions. So if any of you, for example, use an inhaler, or you happen to have any breathing difficulties, it's really important to have your inhaler with you for that particular exercise. And also, there is some evidence which suggests if any of you have got epilepsy, that by focusing on breathing, you may trigger a response. So because I'm not physically with you this afternoon and I can't take care of you in the same sense as I would in the same room as you, I would encourage you all to take care of your own well-being, your own health and safety for the half an hour session, and only do the things that you feel comfortable doing, as I'd much prefer you to feel as relaxed, happy and comfortable through the session as possible. Another important message I share with absolutely everybody that I work with is that if you want something to change, then you have to be prepared to change something. So if you do happen to be rushing around right now and not having much time for you, if you're finding you're working far more hours than you're spending relaxing or with your families, then really think about the one action that you could take that would make a difference for you, for the teams you're supporting, and in your life day to day. So let's start with a bit of reflection then, thinking about the challenges of the past 15 months. And obviously, I think if anybody had have told us in February 2020 what was about to happen, I'm sure the majority of us will have wanted to have got into bed and not got back out again. You know, it really has been change after change, challenge after challenge. Things like social isolation, being separate from our friends, from our families, not being able to work day to day in the same offices as our colleagues, as our team members. Some of us may have been impacted by things like homeschooling, trying to balance work, our day to day tasks and responsibilities, with also teaching our children. Some of us might have felt the impact of isolation or have been overcome by money worries, perhaps, or health worries, not just worrying about our own health, but worrying about the health of our families too. And also, of course, time management. I think it's been particularly challenging in terms of trying to fit everything in, trying to get everything done. So really, really huge impact. And of course, last but by no means least, the impact of loss and bereavement. And sadly, I'm sure many of us on today's session will have been impacted by loss and bereavement. And if we've not been directly impacted, we're likely to know someone who has been. And obviously, the impact of that is immeasurable and can't be underestimated in terms of how we support ourselves and how we support others moving forward. So I'd like you to start with a bit of self-reflection, if I might ask you, please, to think about, are you finding it more difficult to switch off right now at the end of your working day than you perhaps were before the pandemic and before this all began, before we had to work from home or in different locations? Are you finding it more difficult to switch off now than perhaps you were before? And as I say, Stephen's kindly agreed to launch the poll for us. I'd be really grateful if you could decide whether this is more difficult for you or not. Thank you for sharing that. So as we can see then from the poll results here, 3/4 of you are finding it more difficult to switch off. Thank you very much for sharing that information. And it's quite helpful for us to consider as we move on through the session. So this was a survey undertaken by the Royal Society for Public Health, and some of you may be familiar with it already. And the results of the survey suggested that in fact more than half of those surveyed were finding it more difficult to switch off at the end of their working day. And also more than half of them were finding it more difficult to take regular breaks. So actually the results we have had today in our poll is very similar to what was discovered in this particular survey. And I think what's happened as an observer working with lots of individuals and lots of organisations is what I describe as the hamster wheel effect, when we're suddenly presented by lots of changes and lots of challenges. And the initial response is to kind of deal with that, to get on with it, to jump on that hamster wheel and to work as hard as we can, to move as fast as our legs will possibly take us to get through those considerable changes and challenges that we might have had to face both at work and at home. And I think particularly when things feel out of our control in the way they have done over that 15-month period, it can actually drive us to want to get some things back into our control by working hard, by doing the absolute utmost we can to get some of those things back in order, back into some sort of control, as I've said already. The downside of that, of course, is it can be really hard to step off the hamster wheel. And even when we have the opportunity to do so, one of the biggest challenges can actually be giving ourselves permission to stop, giving ourselves permission to relax and to unwind. And I'm sure some of you will already be familiar with the pressure performance curve. There's lots of different variations of this model, first introduced by Yerkes and Dodson many years ago now. But as we'll know from the curve, that actually when we originally start to have pressure applied to us, it can actually be quite motivating. So pressure isn't always a bad thing. Actually, it can motivate us to get things done, to solve problems. It can help us to perform better. As we will see from the chart, however, when that pressure continues over the long term and we don't allow ourselves some time in that yellow zone, the zone perhaps where we know what we're doing, we perhaps know those things we're doing day to day without thinking about it too much, we might be taking some time to relax and to unwind. If we don't allow ourselves time in that yellow zone, then unfortunately, if that pressure continues, then ultimately all of us will reach our peak. Now, for some individuals, that process might take a month. For some, it might be a year. For some, it might be 3 years. I worked with a gentleman once who had worked under high pressure for a really long period of time and had performed really well, exceptionally well. But he said, ultimately, I reached my brick wall. I got to that point where I couldn't carry on anymore, that, it had made me ill, it made me feel ill. So it's really important, both for our own well-being and our own health, and also the people that we're working with day to day, to encourage them to think about where they are on this curve right now. And in terms of all of the considerable pressures and changes of the last 15 months, how many of them might be reaching their peak? Worse still, how many of them might be starting to feel tired, may even be starting to feel exhausted, and very worst case scenario may in fact be burnt out. And obviously it's really important to take note of that, and not only to identify where we are on the curve, but if we're starting to move into any of those danger zones, that we do something about it, that we step off that hamster wheel as I've described previously. And in terms of mindfulness and how mindfulness can support us, it's about sometimes learning that it's okay to stop and giving ourselves permission to stop. Our minds are incredibly busy and we're never going to stop those thoughts. Those thoughts are happening all of the time, every second, every minute, every hour. But we can use exercises, mindful exercises, to help us to switch off. And sometimes during the course of the working day, this might only need to be for 2 or 3 minutes, but can have a massive impact upon our ability to think clearly, to feel calm, to solve problems, etc. So as a group, I thought it'd be quite nice to have a go at this exercise now. This is used by several psychologists and many mindfulness teachers, so it isn't my own exercise, but it's one that I have adopted and used because it's a really helpful and beneficial one from my perspective. So if you'd like to get into a nice, comfortable, seated position, if you'd like to put down anything you might be holding on to, whether that be a pen or paper, mug, whatever it might be. And all I'd like you to do to begin with, please, is to start to get a sense of your body sitting here in this room. Just starting to notice yourself sitting here and giving yourself permission to stop. Giving yourself permission to be still just for a few moments, knowing that nobody needs anything from you right now. Nobody wants anything from you right now. That this really is a special few moments just for you. And if you happen to have closed your eyes, and if you could just open them again, please, for the remainder of this particular exercise, try to keep your gaze softened and keep your head still. And I'd like you to notice, if you can, please, 5 different things that you can see around you right now. What 5 different things can you see? Noticing the shapes, noticing the colours, perhaps noticing something you might not ordinarily notice. 5 different things that you can see right now. And once you've noticed 5 different things that you can see, I'd like you next of all to notice 4 different things that you can either feel or touch. So can you, for example, feel the contact of your feet with the ground beneath you? Can you feel the fabric of your clothes against your skin? Can you feel the contact of your body with the chair or surface that may be supporting you? It doesn't matter what you notice, just 4 different things that you can either feel or touch right now. And once you've noticed those things, I'd like you next of all to notice, please, 3 different things that you can hear at this moment. What is it that you can hear? It might be sounds from the room around you, maybe sounds from slightly further afield outside of the room in which you're in. If you listen really carefully, can you hear your own breathing? And if you listen even more carefully, can you hear the sound of your own heart beating? And once you've noticed 3 things that you can hear, I'd like you next to notice, please, 2 different things that you can either smell around you right now, from your immediate surroundings or slightly further outside of the room. If you've just eaten lunch, perhaps you can smell the aroma of that, or of tea or coffee. Perhaps your own smells, such as perfume or aftershave. 2 different things that you can smell right now. And last of all, please, I'd like you to notice 1 thing that you can taste at this moment. What is it that you can taste right now? And once you've noticed what you can taste, I'd like you to bring your attention, please, back to the remainder of our session, to the remainder of the webinar. Wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in that exercise, and I hope that you found it calming. It can be really effective, as I've said before, because our minds are incredibly busy. Our minds are continually presenting us with new information, things for us to be aware of, perhaps things for us to be concerned about. And by taking our attention to our senses, it can often have a very calming effect. So if you have enjoyed that and you do feel a bit calmer now perhaps than you did before, it's one I'd encourage you to use either during your working day or during your evening. Thank you for having a go at that. So in terms of being mindful then, as I say, one of the things that can be helpful is to notice what's going on in any given moment, giving ourselves permission to stop, to get that sense of clarity and calmness. It's also important to allow ourselves time to reflect, as we've done already during the session, thinking about how we've been impacted by many challenging thoughts, many challenging feelings, and lots of different emotions during the last year or so. And this particular change model that comes from the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is just one example of change. And I appreciate that change can sometimes feel a bit more difficult than this, and some would argue that it's slightly more complex. However, I think this is a really good model in terms of demonstrating and giving some labels to some of the emotions that we can experience when we go through change. So that sense initially of shock and denial, perhaps taking ourselves back to the 23rd of March last year and how that felt, then moving into a feeling perhaps of frustration and anger about not being able to decide what we do, who we see, where we work, etc. That might then be replaced by feelings of sadness, feeling really sad at not being able to do those things and not being able to connect with others. And then according to this particular model, when we've gone through all of those more challenging emotions, and we might go backwards and forwards a number of times, but eventually starting to move to that place of acceptance, recognizing that actually we can't change what's happening. So it's important for us to be able to adapt, to be flexible, to find new ways of working, and in some cases, new ways of living. And that by doing so, we can move forward then positively, rebuilding our lives, our working lives, our home lives, hopefully with some commitment and also some hope for the future. So as I say, that particular model from my perspective is really helpful in terms of understanding those different emotions. And what I would say is your experiences might have felt more like this, that actually you've gone backwards and forwards and felt lots of different things. And so might the teams that you've been supporting as well. Now, from a mindfulness point of view, the first step to enable us to move forward is the step of acceptance. So actually accepting that all of those more challenging emotions are completely normal, that it's okay not to be okay sometimes, and that many of us may be starting to feel a bit tired, a little bit drained, in need of some, respite. And obviously, unfortunately, we still haven't got clear news on where we'll be able to holiday, etc., during the coming weeks to months, but just feeling like we need a bit of a rest, feeling that perhaps we need a bit of a break. Now, what could be helpful is to start to actually reflect upon our own toolkit of resources. So, although that 15 months might have been challenging, and although we might have experienced some unpleasant and challenging emotions, actually, we've got through it. And although it might have been very difficult at times, we will have drawn upon strengths and skills that in some cases we might not have known that we had. So I was going to ask you, please, if you'd be willing to share in the chat function any particular skills or strengths that you personally have drawn upon or you feel have been demonstrated either by your colleagues, the people you've been supporting, or perhaps your family and friends. What skills or strengths have you identified, please? And if you could share those in chat, Stephen's kindly agreed to feed some of those back for me. Have any been shared yet, Stephen, that you're willing to?
Oh, hi.
Thank you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
Lisa says adaptability.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Linda says supporting others to feel less helpless and help me to stay sane.
Brilliant. Wonderful.
Jonathan says resilience and perseverance.
Wonderful.
Helen says internal strength to help support those that have been either isolating or in our bubble.
Brilliant.
Linda says yoga.
Excellent.
And Peter says our team has acted kindly to each during the pandemic.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you all. Some really good examples there, and I'm sure many more that we could talk about for some time. But thank you very much for sharing those. So, yes, important to consider those amazing skills and strengths that you've shown, supporting each other being really important, that sense of teamwork, helping each other, whether that be in your working lives or in your home lives as well, that adaptability, flexibility, resilience that are all essential. And I'm sure if I was to ask you all if there are any important lessons you've learned, you'd all be able to share at least one of those as well, in terms of, the things that have become important. I know lots of people have shared with me that actually it was a bit of a wake up call, that actually it helped them to really identify what was important in life. And perhaps in some cases where they weren't spending enough time relaxing or switching off or not working, that became all the more apparent to them. So, the reason I'm encouraging you to take your attention to the positives, and the reason I'd encourage you to do this with your teams, is that it highlights that many of us will not just have coped during these times, but many will have excelled in ways they never expected. Many will have drawn upon skills and strengths, some of which we may not have even been aware that we had previously. Many of us will have learnt valuable lessons, and even on those really challenging, difficult days where we felt like pulling the duvet over our heads and escaping, actually, we learn a lot from those difficulties. We learn a lot from challenges. We learn a lot when things don't go to plan. In fact, they often teach us the most valuable lessons. And as you've said, as you've reflected back to me, many of you have adapted and been flexible to the demands that have been placed upon you. And I think this is a really integral part of resilience. What makes us resilient is our experiences. You either aren't resilient or not resilient. Resilience is a skill that can be developed over time and developed through the experiences that we have. And in terms of our own personal growth and learning, this is a lovely quotation I wanted to share. Strength does not come from what you can do. It comes from overcoming the things you once thought you couldn't. And I'm sure, as I've said earlier, that if we knew what was coming, we might have thought, I can't face this, but actually we have faced it and we have supported each other. And though it might have been challenging at times, we've got through it, and in many ways very positively. So this is a lovely quotation from a mindfulness guru you might have already heard of, John Kabat-Zinn. You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. And I'm sure you've all been learning to surf very well and teaching others to surf along the way as well. This is a lovely model by a gentleman called David Rock, who's written an excellent book called Your Brain at Work. Some of you might be familiar with it already. It's called the SCARF model. I'll just share it with you all on screen. It talks about how we can support ourselves and support others through change. And if we consider these different elements of his SCARF model, actually our process of going through it is likely to be better and a more effective one. So things like how important we are in relation to other people, our certainty, our ability to predict what might be happening next. Of course, during the pandemic, that's been very low, hasn't it? Our certainty, we haven't known what's going to happen from one day to the next, let alone from one week to the next. Our autonomy, so actually how in control are we? And again, I think in lots of situations, we felt out of control. Our ability to relate to others and our sense of safety with others. And last of all, fairness, so our perception of what is fair. And I wanted to highlight this particular model. I work with quite a lot of managers, and I appreciate that all of you are experts in the area of health and safety, that actually when we consider these different elements, we can really help to support others through change. And some of the things we might want to consider from a mindfulness point of view is how we communicate. And if we're not doing so already, communicating as much as we can in advance. And even when we don't know what's happening next, it's okay to say so. In terms of switching off, how we encourage and practice distinct times for working. So I think the great thing about what's happened during the last few months has been the transformation in the workplaces and our ability to work more flexibly. For many people now, being able to work at home and balance home life and work life, I think is actually a real positive. But of course, the downside of that is some people aren't finding their switch off button. Some people are logging on at all times of the evening. So how can we encourage those distinct working and down times, both for ourselves and the people that we're supporting? Ensuring we're consulting as much as possible and connecting with our teams. Obviously, regular one-to-ones, team meetings, absolutely essential. And ensuring that conversations aren't just about work. So the question, how are you feeling today? The sort of question that might usually happen at the coffee machine or the water cooler, we need to make sure we're making an effort to have those conversations. And making teams aware that having rest time, that having a break is just as important to our productivity, our motivation, our performance, as doing the things, doing the tasks. So actually taking us back to that pressure performance curve and thinking about where we and our teams are. Incorporating breaks in the day, really important, this one. Again, I know so many people that are sitting at their computers at the start of the day, switching on. And because we're not naturally having those breaks where people might be passing our desks, talking to us, asking us if we want a cup of tea, etc., we need to make sure those natural breaks happen, and micro breaks as well. So getting up and moving around. We can consider using a buddy system, so helping people to help others, if you like, getting teams to work together, You might already have this within your business, but if not, well-being champions can be brilliant. Those individuals that, are really enthusiastic about well-being and can raise the profile of well-being and encourage others to do the things they need to do in support of themselves. As we've done during today's session, bringing attention to the positive, celebrating successes, and encouraging our team members to do activities which might help them to switch off. Now, I appreciate, because I teach mindfulness, that meditation isn't for everybody. That's obviously a really helpful way to wind down and relax. But if you don't like that, then what about starting your day with a mindful shower? So rather than using your shower time as an opportunity to plan your day, to think about your shopping list or whatever it might be, what about feeling that water on your skin, smelling your shower gel, noticing how your body feels? What about using breathing exercises during your day, or perhaps for those of you that do like to use meditation, incorporating that maybe at the start of the day or the middle of the day, at the end of the day, to help you wind down? Do always take opportunities to stop and to step off the hamster wheel. This can be a really good one. So when you're going to boil a kettle or to get a glass of water, try some slow, mindful movement, slowing down the body to help slow down and relax the mind. Digital detoxes. I appreciate that we can't often do that if we're working. We need to be accessible by phone or through our laptops or computers, but having some time each day where you put your phone away, certainly at the weekend, can be really beneficial. If you've got family members and you think, actually, I can't find time for me because I need to look after my children or my parent or whatever it might be, can you involve your family in those things? And do definitely take a lunch break. So even a 10 to 15-minute lunch break can make a difference to how you perform in the afternoon, to your productivity. And of course, it's an important message to give to the teams you're supporting as well. Last but by no means least, diarise these things, because if you don't put them in the diary, they won't happen. We often start the day or start the week with really good intentions, but we get sucked into doing, and before we know it, that time's been taken doing all those other things and not taking care of ourselves. So just a few ideas to finish on then before we end today's session. Just a few things for you to think about in support of yourself. The first of those is to accept that neither you nor the situation have to be perfect. I think when we're very conscientious, when we want to do a really good job, we can expect so much of ourselves, and we can often be our own worst judge and critic. So accepting that neither the situation nor we as individuals can be perfect is an important starting point. Do practice stopping if things become too much, or if you feel you're identifying your own signs and symptoms of stress, or you see them developing in other people. Encourage them to stop and to take some time out. As I've said already, a few minutes can make a big difference. This is an interesting one, because I think a lot of us still pride ourselves on being able to multitask, but studies have shown that when we, link up our brains to activity monitors, that actually as soon as we have more than one thing to do at a time, we can start to feel that sense of overwhelm. We can start to feel that we just can't make a decision, that we start making mistakes. So we can consciously train the brain to focus on one thing at a time. So I'd encourage you to do that during your working day if you feel like you're going from one thing to another. Boost positive emotions by reflecting on what has gone well in just the same ways we've done today. Do eat your lunch mindfully, preferably away from your desk. And do give yourself permission to switch off, to take time away from tasks or chores. By doing so, it will help to make you much more effective, much more productive, much more motivated in the day-to-day work that you're doing. This is a lovely quotation from John Wooden. So the most powerful leadership tool you have is your own personal example. So when we're responsible for guiding and leading others in the workplace, it's so important that we lead by our own example. So really think about that, and think about which of those actions you individually are willing to commit to or encourage going forward. I'd like to thank you so much for your time today and for listening to the session. I hope it's been of interest. I hope it's been helpful. I hope it's given you some good ideas to take away with you. I will share this particular slide. It's a list of other really helpful resources. So if you or anyone in the teams you're supporting needs some more help with their mental well-being, there's lots of brilliant free resources out there. So I'll share this slide with Stephen. Thank you so much for attending this session. As I say, I hope you've enjoyed it. I know we're at time, so if you need to go, I completely understand. But if anybody has got questions, more than happy to take those now, if that would be helpful.